My parents introduced a strange, financial punishment system for mistakes, but years later I discovered it was actually covering up something illegal. I was 12 when my parents sat me and my younger brother down at the kitchen table and told us that every mistake in the house would now carry a financial penalty. They called it the accountability system, and they said it would teach us responsibility and respect for money. At the time, it sounded strict but harmless, like one of those overly organized parenting methods you hear about online. But the way my mom slid a printed sheet across the table, already filled with categories like dishwashing errors, tone of voice violations, and property neglect, made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't understand yet. My dad smiled the whole time like he was proud of something, but his eyes kept flicking away from ours, like he couldn't fully commit to looking at us. We were told every mistake would be logged, assigned a dollar value, and deducted from our household allowance balance. I didn't even really have an allowance, so I didn't understand how I could owe money I never received. That was the first thing that didn't make sense, but I didn't question it out loud because the system was introduced like a law, not a suggestion. What I didn't know then was that this system would quietly shape my entire childhood into something I would spend years trying to decode. And I definitely didn't know it would eventually unravel into something I still can't fully believe my parents were involved in. At first, it was small things like leaving a light on or forgetting to rinse a plate. My parents would sit at the table with a notebook and write down each offense with strange precision, like auditors instead of parents. Every Sunday they calculated our debt, and sometimes we were told we had to do extra chores to offset the balance. My brother thought it was a game at first, even laughing when he got fined $2 for excessive door slamming. But I remember the exact moment it stopped feeling like a game for me. It was when I got fined $20 for disrespectful tone during clarification request, even though I was just asking why I was being punished for something I didn't understand. I remember my mom's face didn't change when she said it, like she was reading from a script that couldn't be questioned. My dad just nodded like everything was mathematically correct. That was the first time I felt like I wasn't being taught but being processed. Still, I told myself it was just their weird parenting style. Months passed and the system grew more complex. They introduced interest rates on unpaid mistakes, which they said was to simulate real-world financial consequences. Then came audit weeks, where every action we took was tracked and assigned a value at the end of the week. Our childhood started feeling like living inside an accounting spreadsheet we never got to see the full version of. But what always bothered me was that my parents never applied the system to themselves. If my dad broke a glass, he would quietly write something in a separate notebook and shut it immediately. If my mom snapped at us, she would just say internal adjustment and walk away. I asked once why they didn't get fined like we did, and my mom told me very calmly that adults operate under a different compliance structure. That answer should have meant nothing, but the way she said compliance structure stuck in my head for years. It didn't sound like something a mother would say to a child. It sounded like something an employee would say in a corporate training video. By the time I was 15, I had accumulated what they called household debt of over $400. It was written on a laminated sheet on the fridge, updated weekly like a credit report. I remember staring at it one night and realizing I had no idea how any of it could ever be paid off. My allowance was theoretical, my mistakes were constant, and the interest kept growing. When I asked if I would ever be free of it, my dad said something I still remember word for word. He said, "Responsibility isn't something you finish, it's something you manage indefinitely." At the time, I thought it was just a harsh life lesson. Now I hear it as something else entirely, a justification, or maybe a warning I didn't understand yet. Things started to shift when I noticed my parents arguing late at night behind closed doors. Not loud arguments, but controlled, tense conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I came near. Once I overheard my mom say, "The variance is too noticeable this quarter," and my dad replied, "Then increase the penalties, not the visibility." I remember freezing in the hallway, pretending I hadn't heard anything because none of those words made sense in a family context. Variance, quarter, visibility. Those weren't parenting words. Those were business words or accounting words. That was the first time I seriously wondered if the system wasn't about teaching us anything at all. Around that time, I started secretly tracking my own punishments. I wrote them down in a notebook and compared them to what my parents recorded. There were inconsistencies, small at first, like rounded numbers or missing entries. But over time, the gaps became bigger. Sometimes I was fined for things I was certain never happened, like breaking rules I had no memory of violating. When I asked about those, my parents would say I must have forgotten or misunderstood. But I started noticing something worse. Some fines were duplicated under different categories with different dollar values. It felt sloppy for something they treated as so precise. Unless precision wasn't the point at all. The real turning point came when my dad got promoted at his job. He worked at a mid-sized logistics company, something involving shipping contracts and vendor management. We were told the promotion meant more responsibility and longer hours. But almost immediately after that, the household financial system became stricter. Penalties doubled. New categories appeared like time inefficiency and resource misallocation. It started to feel less like discipline and more like pressure, like something was trying to balance itself through us. One night, I woke up and saw my dad in the kitchen with all the paperwork spread out. He wasn't looking at us fines or school records. He was looking at bank statements, and not just ours. There were stacks of documents with different names, different account numbers, and colored tabs marking sections I couldn't read. My mom was sitting across from him, calculating something on a calculator with shaking fingers. I remember the sound of the keys clicking in the dark kitchen like a metronome for something wrong. My dad noticed me standing there and quickly closed everything, but not before I saw a word at the top of one page. Reconciliation. That word didn't belong in a family kitchen at 2 a.m. The next morning, everything was normal again, which somehow made it worse. My dad made breakfast like nothing had happened. My mom asked me about school like she hadn't been awake calculating numbers all night. But I couldn't unsee what I saw, and I started noticing how often they used the word adjustment. Not punishment, not correction, adjustment, like reality itself was something they were actively balancing. The deeper I looked, the more contradictions I found. We were constantly told the system was about teaching financial literacy, but we were never allowed to see the full ledger. We only saw our personal debts, never the household total. And whenever I asked how the money was used, my parents would change the subject immediately. That avoidance started feeling more intentional than anything else they did, because strict parents explain their rules, but controlled systems hide their structure. When I was 17, I finally got access to something I wasn't supposed to see. It happened when my dad asked me to bring him a folder from his home office while he was in the shower. Inside the drawer was a stack of printed spreadsheets, much thicker than anything I had seen before. And at the top of every page was a header that made my stomach drop. It wasn't labeled household system or anything personal. It was labeled with the name of his company. That was the moment everything I believed about our home started collapsing. I started secretly photographing pages whenever I could. I told myself I was just trying to understand. But what I found didn't make sense at first. There were columns for employee adjustments, client discrepancies, and internal correction fees. And then buried inside were entries labeled with our names, my name, my brother's name, even my mom's initials appeared in places I didn't expect. It wasn't just a household system. It was embedded inside something much larger. The realization didn't hit all at once. It came in fragments. Late nights of comparing numbers, noticing that the fines we paid always matched missing amounts elsewhere in the company records, seeing how our penalties increased whenever certain financial discrepancies appeared in external accounts. It started forming a pattern I didn't want to believe. Our punishments weren't teaching us anything. They were balancing something else. One night, I confronted my mom directly. I told her I had seen the documents. I told her I didn't understand why our mistakes were tied to company spreadsheets. For a moment, she just stared at me. Not angry, not surprised, just exhausted in a way I had never seen before. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. She said, "You were never supposed to see the full system." That sentence changed everything because it confirmed there was a system beyond the one we were told about. My dad came home shortly after that and the tension in the house shifted instantly. No shouting, no panic, just controlled silence. He asked me what I had seen and I told him everything. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he asked me how much I had pieced together. Like this was a puzzle, not a confession. That was when I learned the truth in pieces I still struggle to fully accept. My dad's company had been under internal audit for years. There were discrepancies in shipping funds and vendor payments that couldn't be explained cleanly. Instead of fixing the root issue, he had created a parallel adjustment ledger to redistribute the missing amounts. And to keep it from being traced directly to him, he spread the corrections across what he called controlled micro-penalties. Our household system wasn't discipline. It was a buffer, a living accounting tool used to absorb irregularities in the books. I remember feeling like my brain physically rejected the explanation at first, because it meant every punishment I ever received wasn't about me. It wasn't even about teaching me responsibility. It was about hiding discrepancies in corporate finances. My childhood wasn't a lesson, it was a mechanism. My brother reacted differently when he found out. He didn't cry or get angry at first. He just kept asking if any of it was real, if our debt meant anything. If the chores, the fines, the ledger on the fridge had ever been real in a meaningful sense. My dad said yes and no at the same time, which might have been the most disturbing answer of all. He said, it was real in its function. Not in its morality, not in its fairness, just its function. After that, everything unraveled quickly. I found out the allowance system was never actual money distribution. It was symbolic accounting meant to mirror external adjustments. Every time there was a financial discrepancy at his company, it was mirrored in our household ledger. Every mistake we made was assigned a value that offset internal losses somewhere else. It wasn't random. It was calculated. The worst part was discovering how long it had been happening. My mom admitted it started years before I was even born. It began as small corrections in bookkeeping. Then it expanded into structured adjustments. Then it became automated through spreadsheets and categorized penalties. By the time I was old enough to understand it, I was already part of it. I asked her why us, why children. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said something I still think about constantly. She said, because family doesn't trigger external audits the same way employees do. That was when I realized the system wasn't just unethical. It was designed around avoiding detection. Everything I remembered suddenly changed meaning. The laminated sheet on the fridge wasn't a parenting tool. It was a simplified interface. The audit weeks weren't educational exercises. They were reconciliation cycles. Even the arguments I overheard weren't about discipline. They were about variance thresholds and risk exposure. I started remembering small moments differently, like how my dad always insisted on exact timing for every household expense, or how my mom reacted more strongly to missing receipts than to emotional outbursts, or how every punishment always had a precise dollar value down to the cent. None of it was emotional. It was structural. The final piece came from something I almost ignored. A storage box in the garage labeled obsolete household adjustments. Inside were older versions of the system from years before I was born. Paper ledgers, handwritten notes, early attempts at tracking corrections. And in those early pages, I saw something terrifyingly clear. The system had started with external thefts, not internal discipline, money missing from accounts, irregular transfers, unexplained losses in company funds. And instead of reporting it, my father had built a containment system around it using anything available, including us. When I confronted him one last time, he didn't try to justify it anymore. He just said he had kept everything stable for years. That without the system, the company would have collapsed. And if the company collapsed, everything tied to it would have collapsed too, including our lives. It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission of dependency. My mother added something quieter. She said she didn't agree with how it started, but she helped maintain it because stopping would have triggered an investigation they couldn't survive. She said, at some point, it stopped being about hiding mistakes and became about surviving them. That sentence stuck with me more than anything else, because it meant there was never a moment where things could have been clean, only moments where they were managed. After everything came out, the system collapsed within weeks, not dramatically but quietly. The spreadsheet stopped being updated. The fridge ledger disappeared. The punishments stopped entirely, and for the first time in my life, there were no numbers assigned to anything I did. But the silence that followed felt heavier than the system ever did. My parents avoided looking at each other. My brother barely spoke, and I kept thinking about how long our entire family had been operating as an accounting mechanism without realizing what it really was. Eventually, external auditors did come, not because of us, but because of a separate discrepancy that finally triggered a full review. I don't know what happened in the official investigation. My parents never told me the details, only that things were resolved externally. We didn't lose everything, but we lost enough. The structure that held our lives together financially was dismantled and rebuilt under supervision. My dad no longer works in the same position. My mom barely touches financial documents anymore. And me, I still catch myself mentally assigning values to mistakes I make. Even now, years later, I sometimes feel like I'm waiting for a number to appear next to my actions. Like accountability is supposed to be measured in dollars instead of consequences. The strangest part is realizing how normal it all felt when I was inside it. How easily I accepted that love and punishment could be quantified together. How I believed structure meant fairness. And how I didn't question why children were part of a financial correction system in the first place. Sometimes I wonder when it stopped being a parenting method and started being a cover. Or maybe it was always both from the beginning, a system built out of necessity that slowly replaced everything it was supposed to protect. What I know for sure is that I will never look at numbers the same way again. Because in my family, numbers were never just numbers. They were silence translated into math, and we were the ones paying for every missing piece of truth without ever knowing what was actually missing.